so it is April 22nd. This is Marnie Watson, and I'm here talking with Clarence Brewer. And so my first question is how you became a gardener or a farmer. And that sounds like that story goes back generations, back to your grandfather Clarence. Is that right?
Right, right. Well, like I said, in the teens of the 20th century, 1915, 16, like that. Well, by that time, Ms. Wilson, with her children that she had had with Mr. Brewer in Northwest Arkansas, she famously said that she would never be able to use his name, but she was not going to let him use her children. And I'm pretty sure that she moved away because Norvell and Louise were becoming women. They were going to grow up as females, and the guy would, he just used her to have children and work like a dog on the farm. And so she sprung herself away from old John Brewer. That was his name. And he was in Northwest Arkansas. Anyway, so she came to Springfield as a single mother. Like I said, John Jr., as he grew up, he became a teamster driving freight from Rolla to Tulsa. And at that time, Tulsa was becoming an oil producing thing. And so there was a lot of freight wagons coming from, the up where the School of Mines was and where the oil fields were. So that was John Brewer. And there are a lot of brewers in Tulsa still. And they were there, even before the Tulsa riot, which a lot of people don't even know about. That's buried to history. But Clarence, like I said, he dug the foundation to Campbell School and Jarrett Junior High School and the federal penitentiary and used the money to set up a stop or a farm, a little 5-acre plot out at 123 and Wilson Creek, where there was a ford, Wilson Ford, where you crossed Wilson Creek. He bought it from a man named Atkins, Mr. Atkinson. I think it was Atkinson. It may have been Atkins. But
do you know what year that was that he bought it?
1929 or 30.
Okay.
And he had been excavating for the Springfield Public Schools, so he had the federal penitentiary out there, so he had enough money to buy the place outright. Mm-hmm. And I think he paid $500 for it.
$500.
Yeah, for 5 acres.
5-acre farm.
Yeah. Well, bread was penny a loaf.
Yeah.
So an acre for $100 was pretty steep, but Mr. Atkins was his name, and he owned almost everything out by Farm Road FF and D Highway Sunshine out west of Springfield. Mm-hmm. So he owned a lot of property out there, and because my grandpa, when he wasn't excavating for these institutions, he was plowing gardens, and he was very, very, very accurate, and so he was in demand to plow gardens for people. So he went on with that, and so I got to meet all of the black farming community. Mm-hmm. There was, Sam Duke and, Mr. Cook. Mr. Cook, what was Mr. Cook's name? Mr. Cook was a plowright. He had a couple of horses, and he would plow. Ross Cook was his name. And he plowed all over this area, too. It just seemed like that most of the horse and plow work that occurred in small gardens was done by black men who would go around there. But my grandpa had another quality, is that he had taken up with a fellow who had come from Europe, directly from Holland, up on what is now the corner of Grand and Campbell. There was a livery stable up there, and it was there until just like 51 or 2. I remember it up there. I I I began to process really early after my birth in '49, and so I remember our neighborhood just really vividly.
Yeah.
And but he had learned how to veterinary for horses, equestrian things, mules, horses, and stuff like that. So they called my grandpa Doc, and people would always bring their horses to him to fix, cuts, worms, all kinds of
Putting the shoes on.
shooting, yeah. So,
And you grew up kind of in that whole atmosphere.
oh yeah, well, you see, the way that it happened was that in the 50s, the whole thing was for people of color was civil rights, because not much had happened all the way up to even the end of World War II on the front of equal rights for not just people of color, natives, but women as well. And so the whole social atmosphere was really kind of torqued. So by the time the mid 50s come along, 55 or so, it's time for me to go to school at Campbell's school that my grandpa dug the basement for. But in August of 55, I think it was August of 55, this kid in Mississippi named Emmett Till was murdered, and that was just before the schools would be integrated, because the Supreme Court had decided in 54 that the schools are going to be integrated. Well, all the black parents, they thought this might not be a good thing to do if, there's going to be, wholesale lynching, and, there's not going to be any kind of protection for our children. So I finally wound up going my first grade to Campbell in 56. And, surprisingly, I had just wonderful instructors, teachers who realized that this, they were young women, and they were realizing that had to happen, because the culture was really torqued. There was really a stark difference between, African American and Native American culture than it was, white culture. Was completely different. Segregation was real, and I just got to see the last window of it. As far as farming went, my grandpa was out there farming that 5 acres out there, and like I said, the reason why he had gotten such a deal, that was a pretty good deal in that time, $500 for 5 acres. That was a good deal. But, still in all, the house I live in, my other grandfather bought for $1, and I'm still living on McDaniel Street at National in St. Louis. So he bought it for $1 because the highway was going to come through, and Mr. Saltzman wanted to get rid of all the residential to get commercial stuff to line up along Route 66.
Right.
So he went to James Kelly, James Kelly was my stepfather, or my step grandfather. My real grandfather was Native American. He was like kind of the classic wild Indian type, drank and caroused. The first place I met him was in a brothel on the street that I live. But Mom took us down to Puddin' Crawford's, but I didn't really have a great correlative with Daddy's son. His name was Son DeWitt Talmadge Rice. That was my mother's father. Now, Miss Kelly um, was a I beg your pardon, Richardson, but uh, she a lot of a lot of these people were mixed with Creek. A lot of African American people are mixed with Native American people, just to preserve the genome of both races, because there wasn't going to be a lot of integrating into white culture initiated from the position of the repressed race. But I guarantee you that a lot of white people could have their way with the people who were living under the yoke of racism. So, about 56 or so, I went out to spend a weekend with my grandpa, and it was raining. And so he just kind of told me the whole story while we were, waiting for the breaks to go out and feed the chickens and feed the hogs. And, he had 2 horses. He still had 2 horses. He actually, that's not true. Tommy died in 54, and Betty died in 56. The horses that he had dug those.
You done all the plowing with.
Yeah. And my dad went and picked up a little 8-in Ford tractor for my grandpa, but my grandpa was done with it. He didn't want. He was pretty much. He didn't want to plow anything anymore. He had gotten this far, and part of the idea is that he would have a way station for his brother coming from Rolla to, rest and water and feed his horses out there, because that was the road. He was exactly on the road to Republic at that time. That whole highway that goes out, Highway D now, Sunshine, all the way down to Republic, that wasn't even there. It was just a little windy road. And if you go out there now, you'll turn off to the right as you pass, Menards. You pass Menards, and there's a right turn. The first right turn that you go past Menard, you get to the old wire road that goes right down to my grandpa's place, which was right there where the creek crosses the road. They put a bridge in now, and it doesn't look at all the same. But so I was real, pretty knowledgeable about farming, and we could listen to KWTO and stuff, and so I go, well, I wanted to ask him about what was going to happen, and he was really clear. He said, "You won't be a farmer. They're taking that away from colored people." And I go, "Who's they? And who's?" I was ready, 7 years old, ready to go to war, And he's going. I said, "Who's they? And who are they? Who's taking the farm?" And he goes, "Well, it's hard to talk about, but they're not going to let black folks, colored people." That's what he said. Colored people do this anymore. They're not going to let colored people have anything if they keep asking for these damn civil rights. I go,
yeah.
Yeah, he said
so he
that.
was more like, keep your head down and.
Yeah, then my dad was too. My dad's name was Nathan, and it wasn't just him. It was all black folks had to keep their head down, because if you acted like you were uppity, was the word, then you would, suffer. So I just didn't want to believe it, But by 1960, arthritis had just pretty much consumed my namesake grandpa out there at the farm. Bill, his brother William, had died of a stroke. He lived with him after the war. He was pretty much ruined after World War One, and Clarence just kind of took care of him until he passed away. Norvell and Louise lived over on Grant Street in Douglas. So I'm adamant. I'm going to, be a farmer. Well, the animals are dying. And when we had, at one point, we had, I think, 47 hogs out there. And so we went to the market one day with a bunch of them. I didn't like that. I really didn't like so much the whole animal husbandry thing because I would always fall in like seeing the animals as pets. They had this consciousness that was, active and so I'd go to the farm and all the animals would climb up on me, like for protection or something. It was like they had a sense of, who's, and, children and animals always have a kind of a correlative thing going on. But I remember that whenever we'd go to market, my dad would always sell his livestock to a guy named Tom Gammon, because they would give a better deal to the white man than they would the black man, because they could, and so if Tom would take the weight and take his animals, take my dad's animals, and my grandpa's animals too. Sometimes my grandpa would have 2 or 3 pigs, and he would put them into the bunch, and they would take them to market. But it was difficult. After a while, that began to abate, but only because farming was going out. The Dukes, they owned about 1,000 acres over on the corner of Sunshine and what is now 65 Bypass over there on the northeast corner of that. Well, where all that Reliable Chevrolet and all of that is, that was all the Dukes' property. They were black farmers. Ross Cook owned the property. He owned about 20 acres just kind of north and west of Parkview High School. And the what was happening was they were being aced out of these properties by complaints, legal maneuvers where you couldn't get, if you have no resource, you can't get any recourse in the law. The law is based in money, and you should never, ever forget that if you get a lawyer, it's going to cost you. And if you don't have the money, you're going to lose because you can't get a lawyer. So, those properties were all taken away. That's why Sunshine 65 is that now, what it is, because, modernity. Well, I'm stubborn. I'm deciding that as soon as my dad gets out of the way, because he had a truck route all over Springfield. He had 100 residential and 100 commercial stops hauling trash all over Springfield. And oh boy, he is busy doing that. And then he would also come out and feed the hogs, take care of his grandpa, take care of his father, I beg your pardon, take care of his father, and make sure that, everything was okay with him. And this is like during the decade of the 60s. But, my father then picked up a John Deere tractor, because the old Ford tractor, I think it was a 48 Ford tractor that my grandpa Clarence had, it wasn't holding up real well, and it was used when he bought it, and he was getting out of it. He didn't want to plow another acre. But my dad thought, well, maybe I can build on what my father has, and so he went to Mr. Atkins, who was in his late 70s or something at that time, and asked him to buy the 15 acres that bordered the 5 acres that my grandpa already had. Well, this 15 acres went all the way up to Sunshine, up to D Highway, so it was, and right at FF, kind of right across the street from Mr. Atkins. Well, How much? 15 acres? Well, he's selling it to Nathan at the same price that he sold the 5 acres to my grandpa back in 1930. It was a pearl. I mean, prices had already escalated. He said, yeah, you give me $15,000, you can have that 15 acres. Okay, that's like, $1,000 an acre. But he had sold it to my grandpa for $100 an acre, but that's probably accurate. 1960,
Yeah.
64, 65, like that. So Dad's paying out of his, and we had already plowed. Ross Cook had come out, and we put in 4 years of corn, and that fed the hogs and the cows and everything that was down on my grandpa's place. Well, like I said, that place was the first place that all the troops could scramble up out of the creek to get on the wire road that was Sunshine and came into Springfield from the west side of town. So it was, spooky to be out there, always is. It's difficult to develop now. John Okatomas bought it from me 3 years ago, and it's still vacant. He goes, you can go out there and do anything you want. Well, I'd gone out there to weed eat, and I got a tick infection, and I had to have my hips replaced. Lost 11 teeth, got really sick, almost died.
Wow.
And that was just in 17, I think, 2017.
What was the infection that you got from the ticks?
Lyme disease.
Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Ouch. Is this why you're saying that it's haunted because?
Oh no, they killed a girl. There was a little colored girl that had come to stay with Homer Robbins, who was right up the path from my grandpa. He's a black man, Homer Robbins, and he had a niece that had come to stay with him, as the story goes. And across the street, Mr. Roberts' place, and I don't know if that was the man who built it, but Roberts was the name they attached to this big, huge house that was across what was then D Highway, D Farm Road, had taken up with this teenage girl. She was 17, 16, 17 years old, something like that. She was, evidently she was really pretty. Well, there's a sinkhole on my farm, or my grandpa's place. There's a big sink. The band that took up with the young girl, he was married to a woman in Pennsylvania. And so when the woman in Pennsylvania, started to smell the frost of her husband not coming back and forth to Pennsylvania, and I'm taking care of stuff out here on the frontier and blah, 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 blah. He had bought the girl a purple dress, a beautiful purple dress, and she just loved it, And from what I understand, she was staying up there with Homer from before the turn of the century. So Homer had moved in out there before then. But he murdered her and threw her into the sinkhole on my grandpa's place. But my grandpa didn't own it at that point. Right. This is like in the late 1800s, okay? And they looked and looked and looked and looked for her. And so finally, and nobody wanted to go look down in the cave. So the cave drops like from where your window is down to the ground, that far, just a straight shaft into the ground. And it was probably a lot more open then, but different kinds of excavations and stuff higher up have begun to clog the cave up, and so there's gas and stuff down there now. So it's not a very pleasant caving experience. But they had thrown her body down there, in there, and so they found the girl, and then they lynched the guy that had killed her. They put it together real quick because he'd shown up down here. And all that side of town is replete with stories. Back in the 30s, there was a big massacre of sheriff's department when they went out to the Young farm. There was the next farm up the road from my dad where the Young brothers shot up the sheriff department. And, but, yeah, so the purple girl seems to still hang around the cave out there. And if she likes you well enough, you are okay. But if she doesn't quite take to you, I try to tell people this, but they don't want to believe me, And then the horse fell on Miley, and I tried to say, it's like if you have any kind of intent that is, couched in, modern Caucasian ethic of property and enclosure and, this and that, and even if it's unconscious to you, it you won't fare well here.
She can pick up on that.
It's like a consciousness that picks up on it. So we slaughtered hogs out there when the weather would get so cold you couldn't see straight. All the black folks would come out, the men would come out, and some had animals, like Sam Duke would bring up some of his hogs and stuff, and so they would, bleed and butcher the hogs out there, and then they would bring the meat to a locker that was down on Phelps and Campbell Street. There's a refrigerated locker where you could bring meat and store stuff in it. So, but then Mr. LeDuc at the LeDuc Packing House said, "You colored people can come and bring your stuff on over here and we'll process it for you. You don't have to process out there at Clarence's place." And so that was good, but even by then the Dukes were out of farming, and Ross Cook didn't raise livestock. He just plowed gardens. There were a number of other farms out. There was the Kenefax farm. That is out there where Carver Elementary School is, and it was 1,000 acres. Now, right now, my cousin John Tolliver, my grandmother's sister married John's father, and he lives over on Broadmoor, but they owned 1,000 acres over on the corner of Battlefield and Scenic, and they sold it off incrementally. I think they're down to something like 200 acres or something out there on that corner now. It's hard to get a good price, and the city came in and said, "We're going to condemn your property unless you let us have a fire department and a police station out here." So that's how the city got in on that.
Oh.
So Dad's buying 15 acres from Mr. Adkins. On May the 16th of 1968, we got a foreclosure notice in the mail. Dad was paying like regular, but for 90 days he hadn't gotten any checks from any of these 100, 200 stops around town. He couldn't figure out what's going on. He goes to all his customers and they say, "Oh, well, Nathan, we sent you the check in the mail." And so, boy, that foreclosure notice came on my baby's sister Sandra's birthday. That's how come I can remember it so well. May 16th.
Yeah.
So the three of us born in May. Laureen, my 1 year older than me, May 12th. Sandra was May 16th, and I'm May the 24th. So they were both Taurus. I'm Gemini. But all of my siblings really would process things emotionally really, really quickly. I guess they took after my mom, but I go, well, I want to find out what's going on. So he took the foreclosure. I never will forget the day. Ray Charles was in town. 1968. I was 1 year in college, and my sister went ballistic. Baby sister. My birthday. Why did they send this on my birthday? A foreclosure. Helen was working for a lady named Carol Jones, who was a real estate mogul before she passed. But at that time, she was 1 week working for a guy named Jack Ellingsworth, who was had a real estate company, and he was an old-time real estate guy. And so Helen asked Carol, what do we do? And she goes, well, go talk to Jack. I don't know anything about foreclosing. I just sell property. Jack goes, okay, let me look into this. A foreclosure. Nathan, have you been paying your bills? And he goes, well, I haven't been getting my checks in the mail. He goes, okay. And he did about what you're doing. Started to write this stuff down. So it was Friday by the time we got to see Mr. Ellingsworth. And he goes, well, let me look over this the weekend, and I'll tell you what's going on. And so his mom pipes up, says, this is a 24-hour foreclosure. She says, Francis, we don't have 24-hour foreclosures in Missouri. They have these in Tennessee, and it looks to me like this foreclosure notice is coming from Tennessee. Who is this Atkins? And Dad says, well, that's the son of old man Atkins. He died, and so he's willed all of his debts to the son. They inherited all of the debts. And so he goes, okay, that's enough. So he goes, Monday, we come back over there, and all weekend, oh man, my mom is just like a dog with a shoe in the yard. Just, every time she gets a little bit, distracted from anything else, it's, I don't know why you're buying all this old damn property, Nathan. You know that colored people aren't going to have nothing. We got all these kids in college, and it's on and on and on and on. So finally we go back over to Ellingsworth, and he's kind of smiling, but he's like, he knows what's happened. He goes, well, Nathan, do you know what's happening in your neighborhood out there? And he goes, no, I just pretty much keep to myself and take care of my dad out here. And he goes, well, the two things are happening. One, they're going to put a sewage plant in down at the end of FF Highway, and they want to put a salt depot on the property that you're buying from Atkins out here. The state wants it to put a salt depot in over here. And so Daddy goes, well, hell they do. And he goes, well, it's a little more than that. Your postman is the brother of the fellow that's foreclosing on you in Tennessee, where they have 24-hour foreclosure. And they're trying to get a hold of this property by holding your mail so that you don't get the payments, because my dad was just endorsing checks from, he was like hauling from the Union National Bank and the, from Buck Morton and Jimmy Rhodes and all these stores and stuff and businesses and people around town. They were all, good checks, and he just endorsed them to the tune of whatever it took, put them in an envelope and send them to Mr. Atkins. So, well, then they would go down to Tennessee, and so they said, well, if we just keep his checks, he won't have any recourse to cash, because none of the banks around here would loan black folks no money at all. So this racism is invidious in Springfield, and whenever you begin to scratch the surface of it, then there are too many ways for you to be blackballed out of the culture, gerrymandered out of the culture by way of the businesses. For years there was never a black business in the public square ever. Till maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the change of this last century, this century. So after the scheme was unveiled, 2 days after that, all of my dad's checks come in the mail with a rubber band around them. Jack Ellingsworth says, okay, Nathan, what do you want to do? I can give you all your money back, and I'll take the deed. But this is the thing, is the state wants to buy that, and since your first claim, he's trying to shake your claim from the thing by foreclosure. And so my mom was adamant, no more property, And so Daddy's trying to talk through this with Mr. Ellingsworth, but it's pretty clear that she's set her heels. And we've already, pulled 3 years, almost 4 years of corn off of that 15 acres, which meant that we could raise livestock and not have to buy commercial feed to do so. That's the only way you could do it, is if you grow feed and feed that to the son, do the work. Well, Dad said, okay, Jack, why don't you just buy me out? I'll be happy to get everything I put into it. It was $11,000. And so he got the 11,000 out of it, and he used half of it to make a down payment on a house. Mr. Williams had put a subdivision now along the old wire road that was Sunshine that led out to Wilson Creek down there. So he put some new houses in out there. So he bought one for Mom. Mom was, at that time, she was working for Dayco. And he let the 15 acres go to Jack Ellingsworth. Jack Ellingsworth sold it to the state for $40,000, and they put the big salt dome on it, and that was the end of that. The next year, my grandpa, who had been living on the farm, 69, that was the year I was in the tent, had a solo, and it was really great. My first stage solo. I won the best actor in college theater that year. So they put me in the tent theater, but that was also the same year that my grandpa passed in 1969, my namesake. I found him. We had brought him to Springfield and built him a room to be in on our porch over on Main Street. Well, he passed away, and so we kept hearing about all these other little black farms going, being foreclosed on or unable to get feed, or some catastrophic thing would happen, and that would be the end of that. The same process of redlining had a counterpart in rural red state areas where they, no recourse. So what put us through college, my baby sister, it's not by the 70s, by 1970s, my dad is trying to get all of us kids out of Springfield. He's doing everything he can to kick us out of the nest. Okay, I'm still in town. In 69 I jumped in. I got the director that was directing my one-act play sold me an Austin Healey Sprite, and I drove it to California with the girl from the box office, beautiful redhead, Lynn Burbrick. My motivation was to go and propose marriage to the Jewish girl, Jackie Fishman, who I'd fallen in love with up on Hampton Street, who was Lynn's roommate. Well, she was living on Twin Peaks in San Francisco, so we drove out, and boy, we had a great time. But, my college was only half done, and, it was a great place to be, but, there were still some problems in 1969. So I came back, and my dad had sold the old John Deere tractor after my grandpa got the Ford tractor. My dad had bought a John Deere tractor, and we were going to farm with that, as opposed to horse and plow. I mean, we were plowing in the early '60s. We were still contracting Ross Cook to come up with a horse and plow, and to plow 10 or 15 acres, and he was an old man. Dad bought a John Deere tractor, and then the guy pulled that other thing on him, and his heart just dropped completely out of it. he gave the tractor to my brother-in-law, Sam McDowell, who used to play football for um, MSU, or for SMS, when it was SMS. And they let Sam come all the way up to one semester before graduation, but they said, well, you can't graduate. You know, he had all of his credits and stuff, and I really seriously believe, because a story caught up with them here that Sam had told me, and Sam's father had told me about a guy named Fred McDowell. You know, I had mentioned to Sam that I really appreciated the blues work of Mississippi Fred McDowell. And he goes, yeah, that's my uncle. And I go, Mississippi Fred McDowell is your uncle? And he goes, oh, yeah. And so I go, what? How'd that happen? He goes, well, my dad, Henry, uh, came up. He goes, well, it's a long story. You want to hear it? And I go, no, yeah, tell me. So Henry had shot a man down in Senatopia, Mississippi, who was going to kill him and take his fish. And he was a young man back in the 30s, and so he always kept a gun in his tote bag, and he shot this man and escaped, jumped on the Rock Island line and rode all the way back to Rock Island, up to from Como, Mississippi, to Rock Island, Illinois, and where he got a job with Mr. Woodruff, who was building the highway from Rolla to Tulsa. He had actually invented Highway 66, Mr. Woodruff had. But Henry McDowell had gained a reputation as a road builder for the Rock Island line down in Mississippi. And he escaped after he shot the town bully, who had already murdered 4 or 5 black folks down there and was, just had free reign of the thing. Well, when he approached Henry pulled the gun out and shot him. And then jumped the train and went to Rock Island, where he got a job as, gandy dancer on the rail. And Woodruff was looking for road builders because Mr. Roosevelt knew that Mr. Hitler was about to start another war. So they were trying to get a roadway between New York and Los Angeles together, and Highway 66, was the thing. And so they hired Henry McDowell, and no sooner than they hire Henry McDowell, they're up there by Waynesville, and up from Mississippi comes the sheriff and a couple of deputies, and they're going, we want him because he murdered a man down here. Mr. Woodruff goes, you can't have him. He's the best road builder. He's the road boss. And if you can get Mr. Roosevelt to sign off on him, you can have him. But I can't even let him come over here and talk to me about this because we got to get this done. We're on a schedule here. Well, they got upset about that and left. And so they went down to murder Fred, Henry's brother, because in those days, if they couldn't get the principal, they'd get the family. Henry was called to Woodruff and Woodruff said, what's this about you murdered somebody? He goes, yep, shot him, dead. And he goes, well, he told him the story. And he goes, well, look, that sounds like justifiable homicide to me. Go in there and get him to Lebanon and have Miss Moneymaker to give you a house down there. And so they lived down there on McPhail Street in Lebanon. And they had Henry and Miss Jean McDowell had Liebert and Sam. And Sam was 6'8" and weighed 320 pounds. He was huge. And he was just like a gentle giant. Loved to fish and stuff. But whenever they would tackle him and get him down, well, they would kick him in the head So he got concussions, and so by the time he was, in his late 20s, he was, he wasn't. He was still a sweet guy, but he just didn't. He just drift off, and when, he had probably scarring in his brain.
Traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, in Mississippi, they're going down there. They're going to kill Fred McDowell. Well, there was a white lady named of Katie Swango. Kate Swango, and she lived in the biggest Victorian house in Como, Mississippi. And there's a riot. Oh boy, and there's the torches and the lynch mob, and they're down at the little shack that the Henry and Fred and all of them had lived in, and down there, and they were the sweetest people, in the world. And Katie had a big white horse, and she could crack a whip, and she could shoot a gun, and she was a great aunt to a lady named Tallulah Bankhead, an actress who had been in a movie called Lifeboat with Clark Gable. But Katie ran them all away and said, "This is the best guitar player in Como, and you all are not going to kill him, or I'm going to kill you." She ran them all off, and she pulled Fred McDowell into her house, and he lived with her until he passed away. In the big Victorian. The reason I know that is because I went down to Como to record, and there was a blind woman, Sharon McConnell, who did the face mask of blues artists. She was an artist, and she told me the whole story of Katie, and I already heard the story, and I was happy to get to Como because I wanted to find somebody who would tell me about it. And so she told me the same story that Henry and Sam had both told me. So it was like three people verifying the same kind of story. Well, Dad had given the John Deere tractor to Sam. Sam had taken it and given it to Liebert. Well, Liebert had congestive heart disease, and he was sitting on 20 acres up there by Lebanon, but he wasn't ever going to plow, and his kids weren't into farming or anything. And I believe he was married to a white woman up there. They had three kids, and they eventually moved. Liebert's heart gave out, and she moved away. Then Miss Jean died, and then all the family was gone. But the old tractor was up there, so I drug it down. I'm going to plow gardens. Oh boy, my dad saw that tractor, and at the time, I didn't realize that it was, an object of such heartbreak to him.
Right.
I just say, oh, well, I'll just get this thing started and go out and plow a few gardens because I could run the tractor. No problem. So he let me know that I needed to get out of town. Don't try to do anything in farming because it's not going to happen, because they don't want black people farming small farms. They don't want black people farming anything. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, and these people are committed to keeping the wealth gap intact. Black people can't have money or guns. That's just how it is. And so we sold the tractor to a guy over at the vocational school, and I moved to California for the first time. Got in a movie with Sun Ra and a bunch of people and stuff like that after I graduated from here with the first degree in photography. Because we had been arguing with the school's art department, where I was brought in as a, rescue. I had just become a gadfly going, look, photography is really an art. No, it's not. It's a hobby, Clarence. No, have you ever heard of Dorothea Lange? Oh, yeah, but, that was way back then, when photography was like blah, 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 blah. Crazy. So I argued and argued, and so finally me, Lonnie Boulding, and Mark Barrett got bachelor degrees in photography. And so, armed with a bachelor's degree in photography, I left for San Francisco again. Got into a movie in '72 with Sun Ra, a jazz guy. I don't know if you ever heard of
Oh, yeah.
him. And
I play the saxophone.
you do? Wow. Maybe you could
Not
come.
well.
Oh, well, you don't have to play well to play with me. I'll be over at the listening room. I've got 2 records out. I'm all over YouTube. King Clarence. Have you ever listened to some of my tunes?
Yeah.
Great. So, I'll be at the listening room on May 4th, my grandma's birthday. Uh, and 7 to 9. That's a little building that they've converted to hold 60 people over on. Have you heard about it?
I haven't, no.
The Shoe Tree Listening Room. It's right across from the Craft Education Center, Springfield Public Schools on St. Louis Street. It's right across the street. It's called the Shoe Tree Listening Room, and it's got a bottle tree out in front. And they've gutted the whole thing. It used to be Mr. Reynolds Plumbing Supply, but it's like a building, a single building that they've taken all the walls, inner walls out, to hold 60 people.
Very cool.
So that you can actually really hear what's going on.
Yeah.
These people want to band with me, but they always drag me into these jams and open mics in rooms that are horrible. Their sound's really, really bad. So this is going to be kind of good that I'll be able to get into a good situation where I can really play the open tune slide guitar and it sound
awesome.
good. But with the tractor, it left. Well, the guy, Bud Owens, was the guy who bought the tractor. And he broke his knees because the tractor had mechanical brakes. It didn't have hydraulic brakes. That's why Dad got it so cheap. It was because tractors they were now becoming all with hydraulic brakes. So that was mechanical brakes. It got away from Bud and crashed into an embankment and broke his knees. I was long gone by then. And so after the movie, I came back and was a figure model in the art department for a year. And 2 of the students, 2 girls, decided that they wanted to work at Silver Dollar City. And they came by and got me because they knew I already graduated and I was a model in the thing, and I kind of knew them anyway. One of them kind of fell in with me as a girlfriend, and the other one was, she was kind of, afraid to fall in with me as a boyfriend because her boyfriend was a gay guy. And obviously, back when nobody would say that a gay person was a gay person. But he might not have been because we were all really pretty naive back in the early 70s. But so we all 3 wound up living in Eureka Springs, and I became a tintype photographer in the old Daguerre process because I had actually really studied all of chemical photography. A lot of other photo students just took pictures. They'd work in the darkroom sometimes, but I read all the chemistry and stuff. And so when Jim Jones down there hired me, he said, "Do you know about this tintype, how to make a tintype?" And I go, "Yeah, sure, wet plate." So I did probably 5,000 wet plates down Silver Dollar City that summer of 74. 75, I came back and worked at the garden. I was planting trees and flowers around St. John's when I met Dr. Francis again. Back in 58, I was the first person to have bones grafted in my body in a clinical environment. They took bones out of my shins and put them into my metatarsals. There was a condition called metatarsular pes planus, flat feet, and it plagued the Army. They tried to enlist people, and then they'd go, well, you got flat feet. You can't be in the Army. You can't even march. You can't even walk. Well, this was chronic among black folks and poor white people and, anybody else who didn't have folic acid in their diet. Well, after Dr. Bill Francis had operated on me and taken bones out of my shins and put them into my feet, Hank Williams, a guitar player, singer, recording artist, put $1 million into St. Jude's, and they discovered that spina bifida, pes planus, a lot of these bone diseases that people were being born with was a result of a lack of folic acid. And so I was, Dr. Francis had told me I would have been a hero. You'll be a hero if you do this. And I go, how many other people are doing it? He goes, 12. And I go, well, 12 besides me? He goes, yeah, that makes 13 total. I said, 13's bad luck. And he goes, there's no bad luck. And I go, well, who's the first one? He didn't say anything. I said, I'm the first, right? And he goes, yes, you're the first. So I'm going to be the first person to have a bone transplant? Is that what you're saying? He's, yeah, it's called a bone transplant. I think that's what we're going to call it. So I go, okay. And he goes, well, do you want to do it? Because we have to ask you. I was like, 9. We have to ask the patient. I said, if I don't do this, my mother will give me a whipping. He goes, oh, no, she won't. Yes, she will. I'll do it. I'll do it. Mama, that was her solution to everything. You kids are going to all get a whipping. If one of you does something wrong, you're all getting a whipping.
Whipping across the board.
Yeah. So, I did that. But I came back to work at St. John's, and there was Bill Francis. He goes, what are you doing here? I go, see, I had dislocated knees and a bunch of other. The one operation went pretty good, but the first one didn't go so well. The second one, it was a bilateral procedure. Didn't work so well. Kneecap kept popping out. Didn't work very well, and I was pretty rough and tumble back then. But there's Bill, and he goes, you were going to be an artist. That's why I fixed your legs. And I go, I've already been there, done that. He goes, no, you're planting trees out here for St. John's. He was disgusted, and walked away. Later that afternoon, I'm trying to dig out fence posts because these convicts from Georgia had passed themselves off as engineers at St. John's, and they sawed off all of the poles, fence posts around the swimming pool where the nurses' school was at. And so all the fence posts were cut off like that. Well, they were going to excavate that whole thing to put up the buildings that are down there now. They needed to get those out. And so the posts were in the ground with this much concrete down there. And so Alvin in the maintenance office called me and Emmett and Don. Emmett was 86 and Don was 64. And I was 20-something. Not even 28 or something like that. And they said, you guys got to pull up all those posts. And so there's 60 posts out there. And he goes, yep, you got to pull them all out. So I said, do we get any help? He goes, I'll give you a fire hose and a gurney lift. So like where you jack up put the person in a little bath thing like that and lift him up like that. So I'm out there crawling around there, broke a bone into my knee where Dr. Bill Francis had taken away my kneecap. And he told me, don't crawl around on the ground. So in the shadow of his disgust, I went out and crawled around on the ground and broke a bone off into my leg. Well, I couldn't bend my leg straight because there was a chip of bone about like that big in my knee. So I got an appointment with him. He goes, yep, that leg's locked up. I'm going to have to take that out. And I go, what do I do to then? He goes, well, you're going to have to hold your leg like that. I go, when will you do it? And he goes, 2 weeks from now. You should have been an artist in California. And I go, okay. If I get it out, I said, okay, yes, I'll do it. So he goes, I said, but please take, this is really painful. He goes, okay, I will. 2 weeks later, he comes into the operating room and he reaches around and pushes the bone out of my leg straightened right out. I go, could you have done that 2 weeks ago? And he goes, oh yeah, but you wouldn't have decided to go back to California. So he took it out and I went back to California, got married to an Ethiopian woman, and slowly but surely found out that their libidos were nothing like our libidos in Missouri. I mean, I'm thinking, oh, you get married, it's you and her for life. She was a beautiful woman, but, the thing is San Francisco's noted for its promiscuity. Well, thing is that, um, you know, San Francisco was too hedonistic. It really was. You couldn't plan on anything. And worse than that, I came home for a family reunion. My folks were white-headed and old. I left, and like in 2 years, like it all had just fallen on them. So none of my siblings. My one sister was vice president of Walt Disney Television. The baby sister, she left here, went to Howard University. She got pregnant within the first 6 months of her being at Howard with a basketball player, and then she picked up knowledge that Westinghouse was going to sell its. Can say, hey, you guys want to buy a communication satellite? I'll get you a good deal. They said, well, you fly out here and tell us. So what the thing is, she was left here in Who's Who of America and went to Howard and took over the radio station, WHUR, and made it, one of the top stations on the East Coast. And so they looked at her resume, and so they hired her at Buena Vista to be the director of Buena Vista Television in California. So she invented a bunch of stuff like DuckTales and, a lot of the shows that became the Disney Channel. And they didn't know. They go, what do? We got a satellite now. You sold it. I said, well, you put all your programming. So what? She said, well, Snow White and all that. Oh, nobody wants to see that. We've all seen that. So there are people who've never seen it. And so she just died 2 years ago. Sandra did. But she worked there for like 43 years. And so that was the beginning of Disney television. And Helen, my oldest sister, the first graduate of color, we talked about this about 2 weeks ago. It was last week, I guess it was. We had a conversation. I hadn't talked to her in years. My brother, he took off and went to Wichita State, and he teaches foundry. He taught foundry casting for 45 years out there. And Laureen, my baby, my one sister older, she passed with cancer about in 2012, and I see it's one, Sandra, James, Helen, Laureen, and then me. So, but as far as farming went, each decade, each generation had a different version of exclusion. Sometimes they were really couched in the bureaucracy of government, or you could see the hand of government in there, some, nefarious way, like the postman holding the mail back, or, some asshole in Congress passing some law, or something like that. The marijuana law has just been murderous to African American culture. So whenever there's a reprise in it, well, it doesn't really come back to serve those farmers and people who have been escorted out of hemp. there was a fellow from the 7th District, a guy named Durward G. Hall, who was the senator from Southwest Missouri. He was from Republic, arch conservative, racist old doctor. The AMA put him into office, and he was the one that was responsible for the. I hold him and another guy, McCarthy, I think. They were all over the radio back in '54. You that was pretty much what you hear about. Durward G. Hall. Well, they were the ones pretty much responsible for the death of Wilhelm Reich, the doctor who came from Germany and said, I think that cigarette smoking is the reason for lung cancer. Oh boy, he went to jail so quick. That was it for him. And he had, some other, cures and some inventions and stuff. Pretty much was the guy that invented the electron microscope. But Durward Hall got a bill against quack medicine passed, and it wasn't 6 months that Dr. Reich was in prison before he was dead. But a lot of the, farm subsidies and everything that happens, to support farming never would be channeled to black farmers. You just had to struggle with old equipment best you can, not go to any of the racists who were running any of the things. And it's really curious nowadays. I get a mail from the Department of Agriculture. I went out and made some noise about 4 or 5 years ago about how the whole thing had been steered completely away from people of color. And so now I get a thing from the Department of Agriculture that's acting like I get a vote in some position or something like that. It's, but no, what happened was I recorded a record in 1999, and it went to the top of the College Music Journal chart. And I didn't even know it. I was playing at the Outland. But my good friend Bobby Lloyd Hicks, a drummer, who was at that time playing with a guy named Dave Alvin, called me to go open for his show down on the square at the juke joint. Oh boy, that was tall cotton, being able to play it on the square at the juke joint. So I got down there, Matt Miller and all of his crew up the door. No, blues doesn't happen in a juke joint. It's the only place it happens. What do you mean? No, our fans don't like blues. Then Dave and Lloyd came to the door and said, "What are you doing?" They, well, he's not going to play here. And they said, yes, he is. He's opening for us. And so Lloyd and I opened, and we knocked him dead. And Dave went to the phone, that was on the wall at that time, and called Larry Sloven in Oakland and said, "Sign this guy to a recording contract tomorrow." Next day, "Oh, this is Larry Sloven from High Tone Records. Are you King Clarence?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm King Clarence. What do you want?" And he goes, "Well, Dave Alvin sells a lot of records around here, and he said we were supposed to sign you up with a contract." And I go, "Wow, you sound real enthusiastic about it." "Well, I'm not." So I go, "God," I said, "how'd you get that job?" So he goes, "Well, you think you can make a record for us?" I said, I don't have the money to make it. He said, "We'll pay for that." So he paid Lou Whitney and the Skeletons to record down here on South Street, and we had a record, and it went to #1 on the CMJ. Great. Okay, well, next thing, I'm on a plane going to Holland for a blues festival. So we do pretty good, and I'm touring around. I'm getting calls to go. We play the Big Muddy Festival. We play Fire in the Sky in Kansas City. We play a couple of Juneteens. I go to Canada to play, in Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle. Just I'm going all around and playing. Mom is getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and so I said, okay, 2004, I'm off the road. I've got to stay with my parents. My sister comes out and says, I'm putting her in the nursing home. I'm the oldest. I can say that. She did. Mom lasted 6 months, and it broke my heart. And so Dad, 5 years later, he passed away, but I did not dare go back out on the road. So 2 months after he passed, I meet Liz. She comes over with much the same request as you, and she says, I'll make you a research assistant. I go, great. What do I get? And she goes, a few jobs every now and then. So we played for 2012, and knocked them dead. They had this, like a convention of Western Hemisphere Anthropological Society thing here. They wanted to see the whitest city in the United States, and it was Springfield at that time. It was.
I believe it.
And so they wanted to throw him a curveball and put a black guy doing 30s era open tune blues stuff. Well, by 2012, I had to put out another record, Day of the Supermodel, with Deb Lettner. Hightone had folded 2 years after I recorded out there because it was the end of the record industry. File sharing was in. But Deb, bless her heart, she went to work for Lucasfilm. She works there now in licensing. She brought me and Lloyd in. We flew out, Bobby Lloyd Hicks, and he played drums and I played guitar, and we had a dozen tunes, and she recorded them all, one-take wonders, and then got a bass guy who played organ and bass and put them on after we flew back. Lloyd was on a breathalyzer, and in Kansas City we landed. It was sleet and snow, ice on the ground, and so he got out, got to his car, turned it on to warm it up, and went out to scrape the windows, and the door shut, and he was locked out of the car,
no.
And so he comes back into the terminal of KCI, and he goes, I can't get back in the car, and it's running, and if I don't get in there and blow in the breathalyzer, it'll turn off, and we won't be able to leave here for 24 hours. And I go, well, I said, why don't you ask that guy in the truck, that black guy with the snowplow, if he can help you get in. So he asked the guy, and the guy had a big ring of keys, and he opened the door and got in just as Lloyd blew the thing, and it went beep. So it was great. So we got in the car, and we came back. But the record, again, we recorded that 10 years later, 2008, 2009. And it went to the top of the chart and back to Holland again. So we went over there to get, Blues Crossroads. 2 years ago, 4 years ago now, 2019, I got to play at the Blues Masters at the Crossroads in Salina, Kansas. It's a big deal. I opened for Elvin Bishop and, Charlie Musselwhite. And I've been all over. I've played a lot of gigs. I opened for Ronnie Montrose and Robert Cray and stuff like that, But what happens is I get to Springfield, and all the little sound men start tanking my sound at all these, little clubs and open mics and, jams that I go to. And that was the way it was early on. That's how I got to be a single act. I was a single act, and I went down to the Outland back in 93, right after I built the Crescent for the Crescent Hotel down there, that sculpture in the front. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I got sculpture jobs with Mel Tillis. So I have a sculpture in front of the Pipestone National Park up in Pipestone, Minnesota. And I'm building a big agrarian sculpture now, the plowing woman. Okay. But what happened was Dale heard me open for a band called the Rabbi Sputnik. They had me for a light show. And I asked them if they'd let me open. They did. the guy that owned the place said, "You're really, really good. You're better than that band." I go, "I don't know about that." He goes, "Why don't you do every Thursday for me?" So for 7 years, I did every Thursday night up there, and that's how I kind of honed my style. And I'd always been a blues, old Delta blues, open tune blues fan like that. But um, Lloyd came to town, and the Outland was right next to the recording studio, so Lou Whitney, the bass player, could hear me playing over there for years. And so whenever High Tones sent him $1,000, sent the band 1,500, and sent me 1,500, we just went in, recorded my set, and went to number one on the blues chart because sun is really setting on the old time players. There really is. I um, there's no way to talk about it much because you know they're all gone. Jessie May, Hemp Hill, you know, and the way I got to be King Clarence was when I was having my bones grafted in my legs. It was one summer. It was really hot, and I had a cast. They didn't want to take any chances, and so he put a cast all the way from my hip to my toes, because whenever he put a half cast on, I was still running around playing baseball and doing all this crazy stuff. And they were trying to impress upon me. They said, "You're the first one that has had this done, so you can't mess it up. Don't mess it up being a kid." "Okay, I won't." So I'm sitting in a big vinyl chair, and it's hot as hell. This big, I have a coat hanger to scratch my leg, because it's just like fire in there. And the only thing I have is a little guitar to plink on like that. And so I'm sitting there in the Barca Lounger trying to learn some chords. And Mom comes by. She says, "You needn't think you're going to be sitting around plinking on that guitar like little King Clarence, playing that guitar and not do the dishes." She said, "Little King Clarence," and my baby sister Sandra just exploded in laughter. Mom loved alliteration. She would alliterate anything, that she wanted to be an actress. She was a beautiful woman. But that that was so impressive to Sandra that I began to sit there and think, King Clarence, it's got all it takes to be a blues name. King, like BB and Albert, I hadn't heard about Freddie by then, but Freddie King became my favorite blues guitarist. But later on, I just through King, and somebody said, "You look like Prince." And I go, "I don't look like, I'm a king. He's a prince." So that's how I became King Clarence. And so, it kind of worked, kind of. So, but I was playing a single and had all these amplifiers rigged up to where I could control them with my feet, and I didn't really need any of these players around Springfield who, you know, I think that during that epoch, between 54 and probably 95, Springfield was trying to cook invidious racism into the student population. This is how you discriminate and not get caught. Well, also, too, they're trying to work their way through all of these retiring instructors who had come on in 44 and 38. They, if you add 40 years from the last teacher hired during segregation, you're in the mid 90s. And so if they were hired, they learned during the heyday of segregation.
Right.
So I have to give kudos to Miss Keller, she's still alive, came to one of my gigs the other day. My third grade teacher. Miss Brown died. Miss Hendricks came. She didn't come to the. We had lunch together. Miss Hendricks and Miss Keller. She became. Um, she married the weatherman at the television station I integrated, Channel 3. I had to integrate that station because I had a degree in photography. But Clarence Martin, he hated that the station had to integrate. Got Don Moeller to give me $100 and fire me. He goes, I'm not firing you, but I'm going to have to let you go because Clarence Martin owns a lot of stock in this station, and he's upset. Well, he was an old guy who had gone to school in Columbia and thought that, he deserved a place. But, it was really sad because I had all these friends at KYTV, and the way I got in there was I had learned an ectochrome process that would let me make slides in an hour. And so I'd go down to all the car lots, take pictures of the cars. They would be on slides, and they could show them at the evening news. Take me an hour to make them. I'd get them over. I get $6 a slide, 36 slides on a roll of film. If I did 4 rolls of film, I could buy an Austin Healey, and I did. So I started making money with that. I bought the car. When I came back from California, I went to work as a welder at Mueller's and got a metal shot into my eye. It didn't do any damage, but I came home and there was this offer of a job as a cameraman at the television station. So I did that for about a year and a half, and then it just got to be too much, because you pass by the break room and Clarence Martin would be in there railing about integration, this, that, it was 1970. They just were not letting it go. They just didn't want to let go this cultural dominance that they had in Springfield. It was, and so what you do is you find a life that doesn't cross their path, which means you're not going to be in politics, business, religion, or commerce. That's how you not cross the path of white folks. This institution is racist, horribly. It always has been. It makes a slim effort to not act like it is, but when Helen pointed out, my oldest sister up in Kansas City, she says, well, I'm the first woman of color to go 4 years straight. Well, they began looking for another woman who came for two semesters, but quit in the 50s. Who tried to come, but I think that what happened with that woman was it threw so many obstacles in her path that she, as a young person, just quit. But Helen was pretty smart. My sister was pretty smart. All the Brewers are really smart. And I'm not even unsure that I'm not related to this guy, Brewer Scientific, down here, because he comes from Rolla. And my Uncle John, ran freight from Rolla to Tulsa and raised the family. Started in Rolla, and then they moved to Tulsa. And so now there are a lot of brewers in Tulsa, a lot of farming brewers. Or they used to be anyway. We stopped having family reunion down there in, I think, 2011 or 2012. So that's when we'd had them 60 years up to that point, but then the old people who were maintaining, all the kids had scattered because they were all doing the same thing. Get the hell away from Tulsa. Get away from Springfield. Get away from here. Go to California. Go to anywhere but here, And so that's one of the ways that invidious racism works. You might have 4 or 5 people who are really good to you, but then you move to the 5th one, and they can undo everything that everybody else has done up to that point.
So what's the situation with the farm now? Are you farming currently?
No, it's haunted.
Okay, so you're maintaining it as a historical property?
No. Nobody's going to give me any money. John Okatamas owns it. And he
Okay.
says, you can do anything you want to out there. We're going to put in housing. Well, that never goes through. We're going to rezone it for multiple. Well, there's a cave on the property. You can't build 500 feet from a cave. Well, so he had a consortium of people who were going to buy the farm from me. But the problem is they take one step onto the property and they begin to get paler and paler and sicker till they get up to where the barn is or near the cave. And then by the time they get to the cave, a USDA man had come down with Miley and a couple
Was it
other
Adam?
I think it was Adam.
Yeah.
He got sick.
Oh, did
He got so sick as we walked the farm that by the time we got to the car, it was like anything that he could do to get in his car and get the hell away from there. 2 weeks later, a horse falls on Miley, and I'm going, look, these people, these spirits that inhabit this land, don't like Yankees. They don't like black people. They don't like white people because the girl that got murdered and thrown in the sinkhole hasn't given up. You know, they like me well enough because I'm here with these generational black farmers. They remember me as a little child out here, you know. But the thing is that I get a little bit of a bias. So what I do is I go out and mow the place whenever I can get a mower to mow the place. My brother, when my dad died, my brother came down and immediately stole the mower and the truck and went back to, I'm going to get this as mine. I'm getting mine out of this. That's all I'm going to get. Helen tried to write a false deed to the place in Kansas City. She tried to file a false deed with the county assessor over there. And my lawyer, Bob Swear, up here goes, you need to go see if anybody's making claims on your property, Clarence. So I get out there and over there to the thing, and there, sure enough, she's written a whole bunch of stuff to claim property, which is probably what she did her whole life up there with black folks. Is when somebody was trying to get property, you know, by way of a death, you know, well, that's when you have to kind of really watch out because that's, you know, there's nobody to come back and say, no, that's not true, you know. Anyway, so we didn't speak for years until last week or something like that. But still, it's the kind of thing where I'm probably the only person who could go out there and mow. Miley got a guy from over here at Fast Night Gardens to come out and mow 2 years ago, right after I got my right after I got in touch with her about gardening. See, I thought it would be a great place to have a community produce exchange because it's out in that western part of the county where the farming is all west. But don't you know that 40,000 people have moved in a circle around West Bypass and Sunshine. It's the most traveled intersection in the state of Missouri now. And that little 4.9 acre plot, they go, well, we want to put the blah, blah, blah in there. And so they come back to John and say, it's only 4.9 acres. You can't put anything in there. Well, how about some duplexes? Well, it's got a cave there. You can't put that in there. So, you know, bless his heart. I hated to, you know, unload this, but I owed John $40,000. My cousin John over on Battlefield and Scenic. I owed him $40,000, and I'd put $40,000 in it from the time that I was 19 until, you know, I let it go to John Okatamas. John Okatamas is an architect for Drury. And he was a great friend of my cousin John Tolliver. And so he said, let me just take that off your hands. So I was able to pay John, cover some expenses generated from my prosthetic hip implants and some surgery that I had on my arm because the police came to my door and broke my arm because they thought I had marijuana. Well, I get to the court, and the whole court is nothing but black people. I didn't even know there were that many black people in Springfield. And Liz Sobel is with me. She's going to court with me. And so apparently what's happened in 2016, this happened on the day that Prince died. Okay, it was April 21st, 2016. And so they come to my door and they go, "Does Miss Brown live here?" And I go, "There's nobody, no Miss Brown live here." "How long you lived here?" And I go, "Well, about 62 years." "You're not 62." And I go, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, "Well, you know what's in this box?" And I go, "No." "Is there anybody else here?" I go, "No." "Where's Miss Brown?" I said, "There's no Miss Brown." "Step out here." So as I stepped out, this guy goes, bam, hits the door, and it broke my arm. So they pulled me out in the yard and handcuffed me, and they stuck a knife to my throat. These are the police. And they said, "What's in this box?" And I go, "I don't know what's in the box." He stabs the knife, opens the box, pulls out something, looks like weed. It looked like weed, but it really looked more like Jimson weed than it looked like marijuana. He goes, "It smells good, doesn't it?" Put some in his pocket and put the other under his arm and walked off. Take him down. So they took me and arrested me. So by the time it gets to trial, I'm seeing everybody that they've arrested. Jamerson, the woodworker, just people all over town. The preacher, all these black people are in the courtroom. But this is every person of status in the black community in Springfield is in the courtroom. And if the state had not vacated all the charges for marijuana, and that's probably because rich white people were getting charged with marijuana charges, so oh boy, we're going to get rid of this law right real quick, So they had to vacate the sentences for all the black people that they'd been using marijuana charges on up to then. But I'd already done the probation, and they tried to, say, "Oh, you've got a dirty P test." They pull that on you, and they just run you in the system. So the second I got the test, well, I went over to they have to send you to a third party to make another test, because in terms of science, what's going on is that unless you have a control, somebody else do this, pay the experiment, then you can't claim you made go until somebody else does it. But so I go to this place and they go, "You're completely clean. What's going on?" I go, "I don't know, but I think that there's a love affair going on between the probation officers over here, and this one guy's really jealous that that the Asian officer is kind to me." And she goes, "Are you serious?" And I go, "Yeah, I am." She goes, "Well, you need to get off probation. This is horrible. If they send you here and this is going on, this is all misdemeanor anyway. How come you're even here?" And I go, "I don't know, ma'am." So she sent that over, and then I get a letter, and they go, "Okay, you've completed probation." Well, it was a 5-year probation for this much weed. My sister had given me a bud of weed. She said, "I'm dying of cancer. This helped me." So I had it in a little box up on the thing. And so the guy comes and breaks it and says, "Don't make me get a search warrant. Do you have any marijuana in here?" I go, "Well, yeah, my sister gave me some. Here's this." "This all you got?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You're under arrest." I go, "That's just a..." He goes, "Well," and he goes, "So you don't know Miss Brown?" I go, "I have no idea who Miss Brown is. I know Miss Brown, but I don't know why, her address is on my thing. I said, people were always putting wrong things. This weekend, they gave a foreclosure, not for, it was called a notice to disconnect that was supposed to go to my neighbor. It was in my mailbox. Well, I just had glaucoma and cataract surgery, so I can't really see my hands like now. Can't see the recorder. Can't see anything above the edge of the desk.
Gotcha.
I just see just like you.
Straight on.
Yeah. So I saw, but those letters said notice to disconnect.
Well, that's the important one. That's gonna get your attention.
They were big letters. So I took this letter. I made a copy of it and receipt on it, and ran that out. So I took it out to the bass player. We were going to play a gig up here at the White River last night, and so I said, "Hey, look at this. They're going to try to disconnect my utilities." And she goes, "This is Antonio Sanchez, your next door neighbor." Well, the post office had put it in the wrong mailbox, but had not she read that, the Antonio would have had no idea. Had I not, and so I taped it on his door yesterday, and so and he'll go over and pay him. But the point is that he's bilingual. He's from Mexico. They're afraid to stick their nose out the door unless they're laying bricks. It's just horrible. Yeah. But they're hiding. But so I didn't want to confront him with the thing. I just taped it on his door.
And leave it.
Otherwise, I would have had to take it down to George, who owns the property, George's restaurant, and that'd been that.
I've got just one last question for you. So, where do you see this farm going in the future?
I'm going to buy it back.
Okay.
Probably, I know I'm 75, but the thing is that I'm just angling for some mechanism to buy it back from John Okatamas. But in seriousness, to be very serious, what will happen is that they'll get a variance to put something in that place, either duplexes or some business or something. Somebody will get a variance and they'll offer John money for it. And he'll just have to buy it. But
so you don't think you'll be able to get it back?
Well, I wanted to have a sculpture garden out there because the truth is that there's not any park like that around. Like I'd love to have an agrarian park, a park that champions, the people that worked so hard to bring this all around behind the ass end of a horse, plowing and, cultivating and just struggling to make this place even be anything. A general on a horseback is stupid. They brought very little to anybody, but it's just like it. And one of the reasons I'm so sympathetic to Antonio next door, and really all these Latin Americans, is they come to this country and grow food, while the right wing is going, we don't want them here, But oh boy, whose feet are first under the dinner table? But the right wing.
Yeah.
They want to slave these people just the same way they slave the Africans until they can replace them with mechanized farming. But until then, oh boy, it's a migrant farm worker. I think it's deplorable. I really do. All these right-wingers that are so down on Latin farmers and or workers. I went to Texas. One of the people on the route, Warren Cox, was married, and his wife had a house in Fort Worth. Well, a tornado came through Fort Worth, and so I drove Warren and Queenie down there because her roof got blown off. Well, we get down there, and every roofer in Fort Worth is busy.
Mm-hmm.
So Warren gets on the phone and calls the people that are contracted to come over and fix his house. Warren Cox, That's a big name around here. And so they send over on Thursday these people from Thayer, Missouri. They're in 2 old cars and an old dilapidated pickup and a Trans Am. They come out. Grandpa's got the DTs and he's trembling, and the one kid, he's in a kind of a uniform, but he's got 2 toddlers with him. And says, "Can we keep these kids on the porch?" And then, so you're not going to say no. And so Warren's going, "What the hell are them kids doing?" And, a couple guys that they bailed out of jail, and so they go to work and they tear off about a quarter of the roof, throw it in the yard, nails, shingles, everything. Take off. So we're not going to be back till Monday. And so all this stuff is in the yard. Well, I got to get these old folks back up here by Sunday. So Warren calls them and says, "These hillbillies have destroyed the house. That we can see the sky through the roof. And you better get somebody over here or I'm going to sue you off." And so the next morning at 6 o'clock, like right at sunrise, I go to the door. I'm the driver. These people are old. Warren's like 86 and Queenie is 93. So I go to the door and there's a guy and he's this big. I go, "Hi, how are you?" It's like a munchkin or something. He's in a really pristine uniform. And he goes, "I'm here to do your roof." And so I looked up and it was like Santiana's army of people. I mean, God, it's like, there's like, 50 workers, women, few little kids, but they're like standing, and they're like all in a line. They're like little soldiers. Then the biggest roofing truck I ever saw in my life comes rolling up from one way, and another couple of trucks roll up from the other direction. And I go, "I better get the old folks out of here for breakfast." I said, "Folks, I'm taking you to breakfast." "What?" Get up, get out. Go. So we got out. And in 2 hours, they had a new roof on that thing.
Oh, wow.
So
they really got it done.
Immigrants. Mexican immigrants. They broken English. It was crazy. It was crazy. But, all of those kinds of stories really happen. They're the best thing that ever happened to this country is that there are immigrant farm workers and bricklayers and stonemasons and stuff, because you have to face it. Unless it's a high-tech industrial technology jobs, Americans don't want to do them.
Yeah.
They do not want to do those jobs. And the Latin Americans do them and do them really well. They do those jobs really, really well. Not that they necessarily want to do them either. They want to just make a life for their children to do it. But, nationalism, North American nationalism, has pretty much corrupted Central and South America. Yeah. Drugs and politics. So,
I'm all out of questions.
I'm all out of time.
I really enjoyed hearing your story.